are still joining, I'm just going to pop a few slides up, just a little bit about Birmingham Tech Week really. So I'll pop a few images of the sponsors and of the partners of the week, who without all of their help, this week wouldn't happen. So please do just take a look at these images. Okie dokie, I think we'll make a start and people can join in as we go along. So thank you ever so much for joining us for this session. This session is proudly sponsored by ReadMaze Solutions and Bruntwood SciTech. So I have Dan and David alongside me for this session. And I'm just going to give a quick bio for each of those just to set the scene. So Dan Corcoran is a leading figure in the tech community and an owner of the talent acquisition consultancy ReadMaze Solutions. He's responsible for a vast array of hires over the last 10 years and has worked with the new and emerging professions such as data science and AI ethics. Part of Dan's mission is to give back to society by bridging the gap between education and employment and helping to educate young people on the career options available to them in tech, which hopefully throughout this session we'll be able to do. I'm also joined by Dr. David Hardman. David is the Managing Director of Bruntwood SciTech Birmingham. He's a well-known leader and inspirational force for good with a 25-year career in tech. David currently leads the Innovation Birmingham campus, which creates an urban focal point promoting digital innovation across all sectors and impact the smart city agenda. Thank you both for joining me. So throughout this session, over the next kind of 40 minutes or so, we'll listen live to Dan and David's discussion, in which we'll highlight 3 questions around career landscape and jobs of the future. We'll also be given a clear insight into some of the jobs that will most likely be in high demand within the tech sector and the salaries that come along with them. Following this, we'll then open up to questions from the audience. So you can submit your questions through the via the chat facility. So please do that as we go along. Without further ado, Dan, if I'd like to pass over to you to kick off today's discussion.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you very much for the intro. That was awesome. Hope everybody's well today. Thanks so much for coming along. And yeah, this is a really exciting session for me. I'm really pleased to be here because Dave and I have had a number of conversations about this topic, and it's fab to be able to share this with everybody. So the format really, we've got a few questions we're going to ask each other, and we're going to give you some outputs that you can take away with you, which is going to be put on the slide in the background, which is going to tell you about some of the jobs for the future and also the salary levels that go with them. And I'll start off. So our very first question today is, so I'm going to ask David this question actually to start with, if you don't mind, David. But the first question is, how has the jobs landscape changed?
Well, I think we all would look at this and say drastically. I think the interesting thing is, we were talking about this yesterday, you know, we represent 2 generations who have come through our working careers. I don't think at any time in my career have I been in a time of so much change. Obviously, there's a generation even below you who are now entering the workplace, and what they face, the way in which they will work in the future is going to be vastly different. In fact, those coming into the job market today, you'd expect to have about 14 different jobs during your lifetime or your working time. I've had 6, which for my age group is quite a significant number of changes. But the big thing, of course, that's driving it is the digital revolution. And indeed, who would have thought that Birmingham Tech Week would have been delivered in this way when we look at what happened last year, where we had 40 events and we were all sitting in rooms talking to each other. So the world has changed drastically because of the COVID crisis. I used a slide last year actually for a different talk, which was a quote from Steve Jobs. He made this quote in 1983, which says something, but the future isn't what it used to be. No more so, I think, now when you look at the what COVID has done. But the big thing that has changed is the whole digital revolution. It's affected the way we work, live and play. And as Andy Street talks about, the golden thread of digital across all technology, across all jobs, all business, that is what is going to drive the way in which we look at jobs in the future. So whereas when I started work, knowledge, new ideas came about once every generation, and the uptake of that technology would take years. Now it's taking less than 2 years, if not fewer, to actually get a new idea, and it's taking months to actually implement. So to give a figure, the telephone took 75 years before 50 million people used it. Facebook took 2 years. The iPhone took 4 months to reach 50 million users. And it goes on, and we're now down to adoption in months. So that's going to affect the way jobs go. And I think a review that was done last year asking employees what they expect digital change to affect the work in the next 3 years, 77% of them felt their job would change within the next 3 years. 75% of the business leaders said their sector was going to change by 2021. And basically 71% of those leaders said the companies are going to have to innovate if they're going to remain relevant. So all of this is really going to change the way in which jobs are created. New technologies coming along will ensure that happens. Pleasingly, we're in a situation now where the raw material for those new businesses is knowledge. And that is an inexhaustible resource, which bodes well for the future. And perhaps as a final comment, the results of the pandemic, the speed at which people have adopted new technology, you can see how that could accelerate a move away from the sort of carbon intensive businesses to the more environmentally protective, information intensive businesses. And all of that is about driving opportunity as long as you're prepared and ready to grasp it. So Dan, I'm going to turn that question around and ask you, take a different generation approach to this. How do you think the jobs landscape has changed?
Oh yeah, I mean, massively. You're spot on with some of the things you said there. And I guess, you know, the key thing for me is we all remember this COVID because I've been trying to discuss it myself.
Dan, sorry, I'm not sure your mic's as clear as it could be.
Oh, right. Can you hear me now?
A little muffled.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hello?
Yeah.
Is that better?
That's
I'll
better.
try and move a bit closer. So the microphone's actually here in the laptop. So yeah, I think the jobs, the jobs market has changed massively in our lifetimes. And I remember when I started out my career, I started out actually selling live chat. And the interesting thing is, when I started selling that in the early 2000s with the dot-com bubble and Y2K going on in the backdrop, one of the reservations that a lot of companies had was that nobody's going to buy over the internet. Well, I think we could all say in our lifetimes that's significantly changed. I remember ringing up clothing companies and speaking to heads of IT, because e-commerce was emerging at that point. And they were saying nobody's going to buy a t-shirt over the internet because they want to try it on. Well, that's changed massively. So just in the last 10, 15 years, the way that we live has changed significantly, let alone the jobs market. I think David's spot on. Now it is about knowledge. And oh, someone's just said, can you guys hear me clearly? Let me try that. Is that better?
Yeah, go for that.
Is that any better?
That's better, I think.
Great. So I hope you heard some of that. But yeah, the jobs market has changed significantly from my point of view. But then our lives have changed significantly. We talk about digitalization, smart cities, smart homes. We're putting the Internet of Things into all sorts of applications, and consumers are expecting things a lot quicker because of the emergence of tech, which has made it so much easier to reach globally an audience and to deliver things really quickly. So I think, yeah, the jobs landscape has changed massively. And for me, being involved in hiring, talent within emerging tech, for example, we've seen an increase in a lot of trends recently, such as, the use of AI and robotics in agriculture, the use of data science, the use of automation within different processes. So yeah, for me, whereas previously there was a large portion of trades, I suppose, that needed various different technical abilities, nowadays it's all about the knowledge and their ability to work with IT. If you look at, for example, marketing, the marketing role 10, 20 years ago was, not necessarily using software, whereas nowadays the majority of their role is actually IT procurement, to purchase different SaaS-based systems that will allow them to have amazing insights and to deliver a completely different type of marketing, which is predominantly online. So yeah, for me, it's absolutely changed massively. And I think, I've always been really keen to make sure that people within the educational system are aware of those kind of changes, because actually I feel it's our duty to make sure that people know about this, because we talk about accessing the jobs of the future, but being really honest with you, it's accessing the jobs of the now. They're already here. It's already started. It's right now. And so we're going to cover in a bit. We're going to cover AI ethics, which is a more recent emerging role, but actually there are already people doing this profession. It's not a job of the future. We're not talking about 10, 20 years away. It's happening now, and the speed of technological progress has been so rapid and continues to be rapid that we really need to keep an eye on what is going on and make sure that we're at the forefront of it.
So I've spent the last 10, 12 years now sort of driving the digital innovation activities from the campus. My background is as a microbiologist. Anyone who knows about biologists and microbiologists from those days, the whole digital stuff was a bit of muck and mystery. It's obvious it's been changing. And a few times, I suppose about 5, 10 years ago, I was the 4th panel member on the question time. That guy who's brought in from who's coming from a left field position, talking about digital in the property world. and how, well, yes, of course, everyone is going to well, get rid of the paper in the office. Everyone will work from home. We don't need offices. But actually, today's offices is full of paper and full of people. In the last 12 months, that's changed, or 6 months, that's changed. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how things move in the coming year or so. The issue of job change, though, you can look back, and the digital or the AI revolution that's about to hit, there's talks about the threats to jobs and one thing or another. Exactly the same was the case for the agricultural revolution, exactly was the case for the industrial revolution. Both of those were going to displace lots of jobs. Actually, what happened is many more jobs were created in those situations. In those cases, it was moving from physical jobs to knowledge and jobs. So basically, we got rid of some of the physicality of what we used to do because of the industrial agricultural revolutions. It's interesting, of course, with the AI revolution, where actually it won't just be physical that the robots do, but also the AI and algorithms will start to do some of the mental stuff. So we do need to be fleet of foot, and it does actually mean the education system and learning needs to be lifelong, just to keep in, in the jobs world and employment. But let's turn to experience of hiring. This is your bag, Dan. Hiring for tech startups. What jobs are going to be in demand? And I think there's an interesting piece around who it is that you're trying to convince here that the jobs, especially for those leaving school today. Actually, it's as much the parents we need to convince that these jobs are real as it is the individuals who are picking them. And I think there's a big piece to play here in translating what we mean by these jobs into show that they are real jobs that will lead to lifelong employment. But so which jobs are likely to be in high demand in tech, and what salaries do they command?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, David. So the interesting thing is, from what you're saying there, so I do a lot of outreach with schools, and I also work with my old university. And I remember speaking to one of the teachers at a local school, and she said to me that her son actually wanted to go into gaming because he's big on the Xbox. He likes, he likes playing on the video games, and he wanted to be a professional gamer. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh, there aren't any jobs in that." So I told him that, maybe he should look at something like finance or law. And I said, well, actually, I said, it's interesting. I'm glad we're having this conversation because there's a whole raft of jobs nowadays in the games market. It's a multi-billion marketplace. And that just highlights, I think, that people who are in education, we need to keep on top of this, and we need to keep educating them about what's going on in the workplace, because actually it's been such a quick change that they haven't been in the workplace in the private sector for a long period of time. So to answer your question, what I've done, I really wanted to give people something of value today. So I've actually looked at, and thanks Steph for bringing up the slide, but I've actually looked at the jobs at the moment and the growth of jobs that's happened over the last year or so, because there's been a real significant boom in some of the roles that are out there. So I'm going to talk you through some of the key roles within tech, specifically within tech startups that are growing rapidly, that are emerging, and that also command high salaries. Because let's be honest about it, if you're looking at your career options, you want to know how much you're going to get paid. And so we've got 7 jobs that I'm going to talk through quickly today, and we're going to talk through cybersecurity, Java, Python and Jython, AI engineers, AI ethics, data analysts, solution architects, and then we're going to talk about tech sales as well. And I'm not going to go into masses of detail because I don't want to overrun on time, but I do really want to give you an idea of what's going on out there, and how these are careers that you could get yourself into as well. So cybersecurity, the interesting thing about cybersecurity is that I was doing some research and I read government papers from the National Cybersecurity Strategy Survey, which was published in May 2019. And actually, only half of UK businesses have the skills to combat a cyber threat if they were attacked, which I think is incredible, because we see these things in the news all the time about people getting attacked, about hackers, etc. But only half of the companies, private companies in the UK, are actually prepared for that. And that is one of the reasons that cybersecurity is a massive emerging area. And from a hiring point of view, within tech startups, I see it a lot. But this is across the board. It's not just tech startups. This is all companies who have a digital presence, who have servers, who have networks, and that is pretty much every business out there. The average salary of a cybersecurity engineer is £62,500, which is not to be sniffed at. Let's be honest. So Java, Python, and Jython developers. So I'm assuming that some of you will have heard of these terms, and I don't want to go into great depth, but Java is 20 years old, over 20 years old, and it's still one of the most widely used programming languages in the world. But the interesting thing is, because of the proliferation of tech within businesses, the jobs market is nowhere near saturated. And actually, companies consistently need Java development, and the best programmers go at a premium. So they're the average salaries. Typically, for Java, average salaries around 60,000 median salary. Python developers are also massively in demand, not only because the language is so popular and widely used, but it's more due to the fact that Python is used in so many applications. So it's used in web, it's used in data science, it's used in machine learning. And Python average salary, the median's around £67,500. So Jython, I don't know if people have heard of Jython. If you're technical, maybe you haven't heard of Jython, but Jython is basically a blend which takes the best parts of both Java and Python, and for obvious reasons, both are hot in demand. This is also an area that's high in demand, and there the salaries are 50,000 and can go up into six figures. So AI, artificial intelligence engineers, 41% of leading businesses are already using AI. And we're seeing this more and more. A lot of companies are buying into the methodology of using AI to solve different problems. And employers, so for the interesting thing about AI is they don't just hire AI engineers. Actually, a lot of the groundwork that is required to get into this profession has already been done by a lot of tech people. So people can pivot their careers. So computer science, people who've come from computer science backgrounds, Python engineers, and algorithm specialists could all be considered for Python for AI engineer roles. And actually, the interesting thing about this role, I wrote it down because I found this fascinating, is that AI engineers have had 74% annual growth in the amount of jobs that are being published, according to LinkedIn. 74%. So that brings me on to AI ethics, which I mentioned briefly earlier. So for people who aren't familiar with AI ethics is basically applying the principles of right and wrong to guide moral conduct within the development and use of AI technologies. So it's an emerging role, because if you look back to science fiction, and if you watch things like RoboCop or Terminator, everybody knows what goes on with in the future, what's happening with robots, and in science fiction is that they're programmed for a particular purpose, but actually they need to be guided by the ethics of the human being, because as they become more intelligent, as they become more capable, you know, we need to make sure that we're using the technology for good. And this is highlighted, of course, by the Cambridge Analytica news, which happened a year or so ago, and you know, a lot of people kind of off the back of that have got involved in the emerging scene of AI ethics. So I've actually spoken to Lord Timothy Clement Jones, who's chair of the AI committee, and you know, I think this is a really fascinating and a really good emerging area for people that want to get involved in, you know, something that's going to really make a difference to the tech world. And not only that, but is extremely well paid. In fact, OpenAI paid its top researcher, Ilya Sutskever, more than $1.9 million in 2016 for AI ethics. So it's such an emerging area, and it's so leading that people are willing to pay. There's a massive shortage of talent. People are willing to pay a premium for skilled AI ethics consultants. And typically, you know, it's similar to AI. You need a good grounding, a good understanding of AI, but then there's more to it. So there's obviously the theory that goes behind it, and a lot of that, you know, there are courses out there that you can do and you can get involved in. So data analysts, this is a role that's been around for a long time. And I think, you know, we look at the fact that data is being used much more nowadays, much quicker with technology for insights into business, for actionable insights that they can use to make solid business decisions. And it's not just in tech either, it's across a huge range of sectors. It's always been highly prevalent within retail and FMCG, for example, where they've got high volume and they need to make a lot of decisions. The difference is, previously, it was a lot more laborious to do your job. It was a lot harder. You know, there were Excel spreadsheets all over the place, whereas now with data science and all of the tools that are available, we can reach much more actionable insights much quicker. The average salaries of data analysts kind of go between 47.5 up to 77.5 thousand pounds as well. So again, even at the entry level, actually, this is, you know, a really well-paid profession. So, solution architects. Again, this is a role which, you know, if you're in tech, you'll say, well, Dan, these have been around for ages. Yes, they have. Yes, solution architects have been around for a long time. And the solution architect is essentially the person who creates the architecture for a software system and provides strategy throughout the development process. And these roles have been around for a really long time, but the difference is now we're using and consuming tech much quicker and across a whole host of business areas that we didn't previously do. So actually, these are key roles, and there's still a shortage of good talent, and the average salaries there are around £80,000 median. So I can see some questions coming in. I promise you we'll answer those at the end when I've got a chance to look at them. But so the final role which I wanted to highlight and which I've put onto this presentation is around tech sales, which actually I spend a lot of time consulting on tech sales, because if you think about it, particularly with tech startups, you've got two kind of areas of the business. You've got, on the one hand, you've got the technical side. Have we got a product to sell? You know, can it solve a problem? You know, and then also you look at the product market fit. So, you know, can we commercialize? Is there demand for this product? How do we beat the competition? Those kind of things. And the key thing there is the tech sales role. Now, I call it tech sales because actually within software and hardware, these roles are highly technical. So it's not just, you couldn't just have a salesperson, for example, who had been selling advertising to then come straight into this role. They need a level of technical capability and technical understanding, which is skills which can be learned, but if you wanted to hire somebody to do the job as soon as they landed in your organisation, you would need somebody who's got that technical skills. And again, this is, I've given a wide range for this, because at the entry level, at the very entry level, you've got roles like SDR, where they're making outreach to new companies, and they start at around 20 to 30 basic. But at the senior end, whether that be a senior person who's going out to businesses and selling technical solutions, whether it be an app, software, hardware, at the senior end, those roles are actually in excess of 100k, and the sales roles, of course, don't just command a basic salary, they command a whole package which includes commission, on target earnings as it's known, which can actually take them to double that salary. So there you go, there's my roundup of the 7 jobs of the future. What do you think about that, David? Is this, I'm guessing you come across a lot of these
positions. I'm not going to go into the depth you've just done there, Dan. Your experience is much greater than I. I think just looking at the flavour of some of the questions that have been coming in, there's an interesting piece around if digital skills and experience is going to spread across all industries. It's up to the current leaders of those industries to recognise the need for that. I think the other thing is that whatever you go into the business with in terms of expertise and experience, you're going to need to continue to learn to stay at the cutting edge. And actually that's down to the employers then. They need to encourage that continued development and that continued training, so that those people can go on those career paths that you've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking at some of the questions here as well. And I've got one actually that I will try and answer quickly. So yeah, there's one here which says, I'm an intermediate level Python developer, amongst other things, but I haven't found any job openings that don't also require lots of organisation specific application side stuff. And that's from Ian Chapman. So it's a really good point, this actually. And I think, to be honest with you, Ian, we've got a kind of a moment in time at the moment, because the economic climate, the backdrop is not the usual backdrop, let's say, and that does change the marketplace for skills significantly across the board. And the main thing that I see is exactly what you're saying, that people will be less inclined at the intermediate level to take somebody that doesn't have domain experience, as well as the underlying foundational skills that they need to do the job. And to be honest with you, this is a job opening related question. So to be honest with you, I'm going to give you a quick bit of advice on that. So my advice is, if you aren't seeing the job openings that relate to the experience that you have, my advice would be to do a search yourself for companies, not for jobs, but for companies that might require those skills, and companies that are in similar rated markets. Do that search yourself and approach the companies directly, because I can assure you a lot of companies will jump on your skills as an intermediate level Python developer if it's related, regardless of whether they're advertising a job or not. So that's my best advice for you. Don't wait for the jobs to land on your laps, because a lot of people could be right now saying, actually, we're short of Python skills in this area, but they haven't got around to advertise. So go out and email these people, call them if you feel comfortable doing it, and get in touch with them, because there's definitely a good marketplace for your skills. So I'm just seeing if there are any other questions that I can answer on this. So this is a good one from Miranda. So Miranda's saying, apart from graduate roles or apprenticeships, it's hard to find jobs where employers are willing to train people. Seems they want people to come ready-made, which is kind of what I'm saying at the moment. That can be the case, but it's not every company. It's not every company. There's always a mix. when I'm taking on projects, there's always a mix of employers that want somebody to just slot in and do it straight away, and then a mix of people who actually feel the exact opposite. They want to bring people on, they want to train them up, and they want to progress them through the ranks. So are employers willing to hire people who have only done online courses? Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and you know, we'll come on to this in a minute actually, but you know, education is important, but skills are more important. Do you have the correct skills to do the role? So if you've done online courses that have taught you those skills, at the hiring process, as they go through the hiring process, there should be some form of competency-led interview, which will allow you to highlight those skills. So if you've done an online course and you've got the skills to do the job, and if they're technical, you know, I'd highly recommend that you do, you know, you put yourself out there if you're doing any technical projects with GitHub and the likes of, so that your work can be seen. But absolutely, they would hire you if you've got the right skills and you've learned them online. Of course, they would, yeah. I'm just looking through to see if there are any other questions that we can answer. So somebody talks here about entry-level roles. How about getting into entry-level roles, have good qualifications but no work experience? I think this is a really good point. I think with technical roles, you know, the qualifications are fantastic, but employers do look for you know, some experience in the domain, quite rightly so. And now, if you're looking at technical roles, as I've just mentioned, the great thing is, you know, a lot of tech people are into keeping their skills topped up and actually practicing their skills and doing different developments, etc. So you can quite easily create a portfolio of work that you've done, which can be practically applied within the workplace, and then approach employers, because there'll be plenty of employers that will be taking on at the junior levels, but they will of course be looking to see people that are interested in their domain. So, you know, my advice to you is, yeah, do some projects off your own back, and if that's not getting the interest, then actually, you know, consider, you know, doing some relevant work experience for the field that you want to go into in the tech side of it. But I'm interested in, David, I'm really interested in your opinions on this around the education piece, because I guess, you know, people do put an emphasis on education. And, you know, a lot of people here are talking about apprenticeships and kind of entry-level roles. And I know you've got a unique experience and unique insight into whether do people need to be highly educated? Do they need a degree? Do they need a master's to get themselves into the jobs of the future?
It's an interesting one, and I think partly it's going to depend on the sector. There's been for decades a requirement for bits of paper in the form of qualifications and going through to universities and the likes to get degrees or whatever. And in certain subjects, you're going to continue to need to do that. Obviously, a lot of the life sciences side of things, the nature of the detail that goes into that, to be in the innovating coalface, then qualifications, it's more about building experience, but ends up being reflected in paper qualifications. But I think there's an interesting piece, especially for digital, that is around skills and talent, and innate talent that actually exists. And one of the things that I have seen, and we've been working with one of the FE colleges in the region, is that people are not actually don't account for their innate skills in digital, and unfortunately, the schools seem to work on the principle, as long as you understand Microsoft Office, you're fine. Innate skills that you mainly have developed in your bedroom or at home in terms of your digital capabilities become absolutely a selling point. Now, as a microbiologist, computer languages and coding and all that, yeah, I'm going to leave that to others. There's an interesting piece, though, that actually, for how much longer are we going to need to use these languages when the computer and AI will come along and actually create the programs for us, and just with a plug and play type method?
Yeah.
I don't think that's too far off. But I think that understanding your innate skills is something that's important. And of course, I'm talking here about the upcoming generation for work rather than those already in it. But I do fear at the moment we're focusing on training people in the technology as opposed to its application. And as a result of that, we are not pulling out this innate capability that the Gen Zs, those born in 2000, actually have. They need to be trained in how to use those skills: digital numeracy, literacy, higher order thinking, social and emotional skills, and make them aware of the talent they have. Best example, the best way to do this is sort of show it by example. So there was a company in the Midlands, cybersecurity company, that was looking for 2 new cybersecurity employees. And they went to one of the local universities and set up a 2-day panel interview session with them. And they were encouraged to also look at 3 individuals who hadn't been to university, who'd hardly got a paper qualification to their name, but were innately digital. At the end of the 2 days, they offered the jobs to the 3 people, not the 8. And I think that's a sort of fascinating thing, because what's basically happened there is these are people who've taught themselves all the issues around cybersecurity by doing. The result of that is they're up to date and they're at the cutting edge. And if you look at the industry, the tech industry, as opposed to them, actually there's a propensity to employ people who are self-taught and are at the cutting edge, rather than have a paper qualifications that says they can do X, Y, and Z. So be self-belief in what you're able to do, competence to walk through the door and convince people that you can do critical thinking, that you can problem solve, that you're creative, that you can solve the problems for them, actually, I think is really valuable. And hopefully, if you've got an enlightened management, they're looking to learn as much from the young minds coming in as they are to teach those young minds how to work in their business. The other sector, of course, that digital is having a major impact is in the creative sector. And I think there's an interesting issue we have, that we take the creatives as something different to the techies. But the reality is there is no difference. They're all creative. And the opportunity there is to make sure that the whole lot is joined up. So I would like to say that talent and skills, especially in the digital space, will become more important, or indeed is very likely already more important than paper qualifications. And I think there's a road to go on that yet, though, before it'll be truly implemented in that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, from running a talent acquisition consultancy and working with companies, it's one of the things that, you know, one of the first things we look at is, you know, how do we measure that? How do we measure what good is? And, you know, it's never just looking at the education, to be honest with you. The education, you know, can be a good predicator to success in some circumstances, but actually, people that have the skills and the talent, and you're absolutely right, that's what we have to focus on. We focus on the skills and the talent and the ability, the underlying, having the right underlying mindset, thought process, that critical thinking, all of these kind of skills that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily learn in education. So I think the education becomes somewhat irrelevant. And I really like your point about, you know, programming of the future being zero coding, because actually you know, so I worked with Del Boomi to look at integration platforms as a service. And actually, Del Boomi, for example, have an integration platform which is zero coding, and there's a number of suppliers now that are doing that. So anybody who understands the business processes would be able to do an integration between two pieces of software. And I think it's the same with both integrations. It's the same with coding, programming, anything that can be done technically that used to be done by zeros and ones being typed into a computer can now be done drag and drop. So actually, if people are interested in business, if people are interested in solving business issues, it's within all of our reach nowadays, and I think that's only going to become more and more prevalent as time goes by, because this zero coding technology is happening rapidly.
Dan, I just wanted to pick up on a point that was made in the chat, which is really great that there's such healthy discussion going on there, because it shows, that it's such a topic to talk about. Somebody mentioned in there, is it too late to start an apprenticeship at the age of 55? And I think it kind of also highlights the fact that in the year that we've had, and people, unfortunately, a lot of people losing their jobs, kind of how easy is it to pivot your career into the tech industry and into these roles that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the key thing is most employers nowadays are pushing the agenda of non-discrimination and positive discrimination. That's both across ageism, sexism, racism, etc. They're trying to eliminate all the isms and bring back diversity, because there's pros, there's absolutely benefits to having a diverse workforce. So age is one of those things. The thing is, when I work with companies, to be honest with you, I actively try and understand their diversity policy, and it's something you can look up. You can look up companies' diversity policies and see how they think and feel about this. But I can tell you now that the absolute trend is for companies not to look at age, but in line with what David's saying, they tend to look at the talent and the skills, and then through the hiring process, they will have some form of competency-based interviewing, which allows them to see whether you're capable of doing the job. And honestly, age is not a factor. Age is not a factor. It's whether you're the right person for the job and whether you can solve the problems that they want you to come in and solve. So absolutely, and I don't believe there's an age limit on apprenticeship. So if you are looking to career pivot and you want to learn new skills, then there are many, there are many schemes out there that you can get involved with. Some will be government funded as well, so it may not cost you very much. Some will be private, but you can definitely retrain and get involved in this. I think it's fantastic that you're showing an interest in that, to be honest, because looking into the future, these are kind of skills that will be in demand. And 55 for me, 55 is still young in your career. You've still got a huge amount of things that you can go out and do. So age should not be an issue.
The other thing we'd be remiss of me not to raise, of course, is the idea of people setting up their own business as well. There's nothing like an economic crisis to stimulate startup businesses, and it's a different working environment, obviously, to go in and working with one of the big four finance houses or whatever. But similarly, it has some huge rewards, and you can pick up a lot of experience as a consequence of joining an early stage business, because you have to multitask, you have to bring a whole range of different skills to bear. So the idea of looking at for opportunities in the micro businesses as well as in the larger businesses, and I'm sure Dan won't mind me saying, the micro businesses, you don't normally go via headhunters to find it, because the micro businesses are not normally employing headhunters to find them. But there are opportunities there. And as I say, at a time of economic crisis which we're in at the moment, I would perceive there'll be a lot of new startups in the coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, some of the good things that have come out of, you know, recent times is that companies are looking at how do they acquire the right talents and skills, and they're doing it really differently. You know, we're working online more. You know, we're able to do things in ways that maybe previously we didn't think possible, in my opinion. And I think that will change the profile of people, and I think it will only improve the ability for diversity as well, to be honest with you, because you've got no geographical restrictions, for example. So people can, you know, people can be reached wherever they are. But yeah, I think it's interesting. So I've seen a couple of questions coming around, you know, job seeking, etc., which, you know, we can cover off briefly, but the purpose of the talk really is to talk about the future of jobs. But in terms of you know, what people are doing to promote themselves, I think there's a whole raft of tools nowadays to promote yourself, actually, if you're looking to get into tech. And it starts with you know, the gentleman who's talked about acquiring new skills. I think that's fantastic. If you're looking to learn tech skills, you can do that. You can learn that online, whether it's a recognised course and qualification, or whether it's off your own back. And that will give you access to the jobs of the future. And the kind of the areas that I would point you towards are, you know, the areas that we discussed earlier, such as, you know, understanding of computer science, looking at artificial intelligence, looking at maybe cyber security. These are all kind of areas where, you know, there's massive demand and there's a shortage of skills. So, regardless of your situation, if you can, if you're willing to learn, if you don't have those skills, or if you already have some base level skills and you want to learn on top of those, then you know, absolutely there will be jobs in the marketplace across the board, from startups through to big companies, in my opinion.
And Alan Blunder's just been talking about this, and I apologise to Alan, I hadn't read your comment before I went into the whole issue around early stage businesses. But you know, accessing and finding them. I would of course say look at the incubators around around Birmingham. We have plenty of them across the creative sector, across the tech sector, life sciences, and the finance sector. There are incubators that are specialising in all of these, and there, you know, there are plenty of businesses there, and networking events. Come to the networking events, because that's how you'll come across them.
Okay, so I think that's kind of the questions we've covered off in the chat. If anybody else has any, please feel free to populate those now. I think my only other question that I was kind of had was the kind of subjects that people should be looking at now, so to look at those jobs. So, you know, if they're in schools at the moment, if they're retraining, if they are a 55-year-old who wants to get into the tech sector, kind of what kind of subjects would you suggest to look at right now?
I think it's a really good question, that. And the interesting thing is, I posted an article on LinkedIn earlier in the year about, in China, they're actually embedding you know, data science and artificial intelligence into the school curriculum, which is amazing. But you know, the core basis of a lot of the techie roles, especially you know, data science and programming, is mathematics and computer science. But it is really accessible for anybody. You know, you can learn so much online yourself. You can put that into practice. You know, you can build your own chatbot if you want to. I've actually done it. You can go online and build your own chatbot for free nowadays, and you can learn how to do it yourself, you know, if you've got the interest. But I'd certainly say, you know, if people really want to get into you know, the higher paid future tech roles, I'd certainly say that, you know, whereas previously, you know, we might be encouraging children to look into professions such as law or finance, and those are great things to go into. But if you want to get into tech, then I'd certainly be looking at mathematics and computer science type subjects to get myself into those worlds. And you know, you don't have to go through degree level, but there are really good degrees nowadays for, you know, AI ethics, artificial intelligence, data science. You know, it's just being aware of what's out there, and you know, and making sure that young people are aware of those opportunities as well.
I think the in addition to those technical skills, it is those other things I talked about: the critical thinking, creativity, people management, people to work in teams, and that sort of stuff, which will be is a major selling point when it comes to being picked up into a job. So it is the soft skills as well as the digital ones, and if the prediction is that if AI starts to do all the grunt work of doing the programming, then those other skills, i.e. not so much the technology, but how to apply that technology to the business that you're looking to work in, will be key. But it won't stop. There's a quote that I read recently, which I like: "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." So it is about not accepting that you've got a job, that's it. To stay in the job, you will need to keep developing yourselves, and to get the job to start with, you need to do it, and then to stay in it, you'll need to, or if you want to progress onto other things. Learning is important, and if I ever went into a school and I was asked what's the most important thing a school can do, the answer is straightforward: it's teach you how to learn, because that is what and now everything is so much at our fingertips. In terms of the ability, all those courses, free and otherwise, that sit on the internet. For the proactive, there's real opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you know, the interesting thing is across the board, whether you're looking at you know, really senior hires, you know, from kind of non-exec and exec level, or even right down to the junior level hires, the interesting thing is if you've got two people who are equally matched from a you know, from an experience point of view or from a skill point of view, the soft skills are then what are used to make the deciding decision. And you know, those are things like you know, their thirst for knowledge, how personable they are, their intellectual curiosity, and I think that's a big one, David. And I totally agree with you. You know, the school agenda, you know, definitely needs to be around teaching people how to learn and how to be you know, intellectually curious, because if you're a lifelong learner, then a lot of employers will see that during the interview process, and then they also feel that you're coachable and they can work with you, and these are all really important traits. And quite often, you know, David's example was, you know, fantastic, but quite often that will lead to people who maybe don't have an education getting employed over somebody that does have an education, because they excel in those areas.
Right, I think that kind of brings us to an end, and I think all our takeaways is that we need to continue learning. And I think, if anything, that this year of 2020's thrown at us, I think that is what we'll all take away, that we all need to continue to keep learning. So we are out of time. Amazingly, we've kind of filled this hour without even kind of getting into the depths of the depths. So thank you ever so much to Dan and David for joining me this afternoon. Thank you ever so much to everybody else who has contributed to the chat and also joined us, potentially giving up your lunch hour, which I know is precious right now. So yes, thank you ever so much. I just wanted to let you know that our next session that we'll be delivering for Birmingham Tech Week is on Thursday. So on Thursday at 12:45, same time as this session, David will be joined by our Head of Innovation, Kath Fuller, and they'll be discussing building and nurturing your business within an innovation ecosystem. So as Dave mentioned earlier, those incubator programs that are out there, we're going to dive into and see how you guys can get the most out of those. So without further ado, thank you ever so much. Please link in with us, connect with us, follow us on social media to find out what else is going on. And I wish you all a pleasant day and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thank you ever so much.
Bye all.
Thank you so much.